Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to look at a podcast that has come out from Marvel, and it is part of a series focusing on the history of Marvel Comics. And what I'm going to eventually lead up to is why, once again, you have Marvel Comics promoting characters, especially now in the movies and the television, characters that no one wants to see, and characters that just died in the comics because no one wanted to read them, and their series had to be canceled over and over again. And yet, they're taking these characters and they're pushing them in front of an even larger audience with television and movies. And the question is why? And my last two videos, I went over the supporting reasons as to why they are doing this. And I'll link those two videos at the end of this one if you want to go back and listen to them. But very briefly, what I said 2 videos ago was the fact that you have a traditional idea of hero, and a traditional idea of hero for the last 3,000 years in Western civilization is a paragon of virtue. And virtue is based upon choice. So you have these heroes, and they are choosing. And as a reader, you are being presented a hero, and you might take those choices that they are presenting you and do several things with them. You could say, hey, I want to be like this hero, therefore I want to make these kinds of choices myself. I want to choose to be just. I want to choose to be courageous. And all that kind of thing. Or you could simply choose to keep buying these comics because you like the way that these heroes are expressed, and you will take in from these characters over and over again as you continue to read these comics, those heroic choices that they make and their heroism that they are presenting to you. But with these new quote-unquote progressive heroes that you have coming out of especially Marvel, but most other companies right now as well, these progressive heroes, they're not based upon those old ideas. They're not based upon ideas of choice at all. They're based upon an idea that takes your choice away. It is based upon educating you. That's what they want to do. They want to educate you. And in order to do that, they get around your choices. They make sure they marginalize your choices. So you can't actually make them, because you shouldn't be making choices for yourself. No, you have to be taught how to act. You don't choose. Now, in my last video, I showed how this expresses itself financially in these comics and why they keep on putting these comics and these characters out in front of an audience even though they do so poorly financially. But today I want to go into the reasons why they are doing this, not just financially, but their ideological reasons as to why they're doing this. And you can see this very well within the way that they present this history of Marvel Comics. Now, first off, as I usually do, I look at the format in which they express these ideas, because that's extremely important. And if you look at this series about the history of Marvel Comics, you will see their idea of what history is. Because, again, it's quite different from your traditional idea of history. And again, it is something that removes the idea of choice. Because their idea of history is a progressive idea of history. That is to say that they see it just like any other progressive movement throughout history. They see all of the events of history as simply progressing upwards to what we have now, and will continue to progress into this utopia, this heaven on earth that they think that they can build. Now, if you think that I'm reading all of that into what they are saying, no, not at all. They actually have a short little discussion at the beginning of this podcast saying that history ends in the present. Now, this is a progressive idea, once again, because the traditional idea of how to teach history and how to learn from history, and by the way, I do have a history degree, so I did study history for a while, but the traditional way that history was presented, again, it revolved all around choice, because you have history and it's presented to you so that you can look at all of these events and all of these choices that these people made in history, and you can learn from them, and you can say, okay, they made a bad choice there. We're not going to repeat that again. And that was what history was all about, and that's why you taught history. But no, that's not how these people look at history. The progressive idea of history is that history is simply a series of events that leads to your progressive utopia. And that is exactly how they present this history here, by saying that the end of history is the present. And they're focusing on the 2000s, 2004, and 2005 specifically in this podcast. And what do they say? This is the quote from the presenter. Her name is Lorraine Cink. And she says, 2004, 2005 are like the best time for comics. For some reason, it's like 1962 to 1963, and then like 2004 to 2005. And the other two presenters, one of which is Sana Amanat, the second in command at Marvel Comics, they agree with this statement wholeheartedly. So the funny thing is that they have to acknowledge the origins of Marvel, because this entire podcast is supposed to be celebrating the origins of Marvel. So they have to recognize the importance of 1962 and 1963. But then they say, well, none of the rest of that stuff that came in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, you know, all that beautiful storytelling and all that beautiful art and all of those spectacular sales. No, we don't pay any attention to that. That's not the best time in Marvel Comics. No, 2004 to 2005 is the best time in Marvel Comics. And why? Because this progressive ideology just took hold of everything. And in a minute or two, I'm going to play some clips for you from this podcast because, well, she's reading from a script, so she gets it out fairly quickly. But before I get to that, I'll give you a little setup. So she's talking about 3 different comics. She's talking about a group and 2 different individuals. The first one would be the Runaways, and the second one is Shuri, and the third one is Kate Bishop's Hawkeye. Now, again, they're talking about these characters as being the summit of Marvel Comics. And yet, if you look at how they're selling today, well, let's just look briefly at how this summit of Marvel Comics is selling today. You have the West Coast Avengers, which is the book that was the Kate Bishop book. And it was canceled a couple of months ago for low sales because it was shipping only slightly above 13,000 issues in its last month. You have Shuri, which has been canceled last month for low sales because, again, it was shipping somewhere around 10,700 per month. And you have the Runaways, which is an ongoing series, which is still being put out there and is shipping less than 9,000 per month. And this, again, is what they consider the summit of Marvel Comics. And why do they consider it the summit of Marvel Comics? Because of the progressive ideology that these heroes embody. So I'm going to play 2 clips for you. One that focuses on the Runaways and then one that focuses on Kate Bishop's Hawkeye and then the little bit at the end where she talks about all of these characters combined. And I hope that you can get through these 2 clips because they do really show exactly what I'm talking about. And by the way, I did speed up these clips just a little bit because A, I don't want to have to waste too much of your time so you can get through this with some speed. And B, quite honestly, I think people talk painfully slow, especially on the internet. I listen to everything on 2 to 4 times the speed. Everything. So here are these clips. I don't think you're going to have any problem whatsoever picking out the progressive ideology here.
Runaways were a group of very privileged children from Los Angeles who happened to find out that their parents were supervillains. They, of course, one night were hanging out together at their friend's house. They start sneaking around and they reveal a secret passage in which their parents are sacrificing a runaway. What nice parents. Not cool. They're wearing a bunch of red robes and being straight up creeps. And they decide our parents are murderers and we should run away. Hence the name The Runaways. I particularly love The Runaways because they are mostly a female team. They have a couple of dudes, but their ladies are really, really awesome. And I especially love this team because of its really different and unique members. So there's Molly Hayes. She's only 12 years old, but she is a powerhouse. She's their strongest member. She's their bruiser for the most part. Then there's Carolina Dean. She is this blonde, perfect model who is dealing with the fact that she is queer and she comes out. And not only does she come out, she comes out also as an alien. She finds out that when she removes this bracelet that her mother had always made her wear, that she has rainbow magic alien powers. Then there is Nico Minoru, who is a Japanese-American goth master of blood magic. Blood magic is literally in her blood. And she's also like a really awesome queer icon within the Marvel Universe. Then there is Old Lace, another lady, except for this lady happens to be a dinosaur. Old Lace is psychically linked with none other than Gertrude Yorks. I love Gertrude Yorks because not only is she very brilliant and outspokenly feminist as a character, she was also a woman of size, and that had not really been depicted in comics. Even up into the 2000s, you're hard-pressed to find a character that is plus size that isn't made into a joke in some way. And this was the first time that she was just a woman who was not a size 2, and she was super okay with it. And by woman, I mean she's a teenager. I also love her love interest is a guy named Chase Stein. If you think about it, if they ever get married, she'll become Gertrude Stein, which is, boom, so brilliant to begin with. And he's a really fun love interest for her because he kind of seems like the kind of guy who should like be with someone like Carolina, like another little model jock, popular kid. And he's obsessed with Gert because she's so brilliant and she's so sassy and he's so into her. And I love that their relationship, she's not like super insecure about it. She's just like, yeah, I'm freaking awesome. Clearly he's into me and he's super into her and I'm just obsessed with it. And then there is also Alex Wilder, who's like a gamer and a genius, and he's a young African-American teenager. Their comics are so awesome because in particular, I love that they're dealing with the real life, the real world that they are now being thrust into, especially being fairly protected growing up incredibly wealthy and in places of power in their community. Now they have nothing and they have no one. And not only that, but their kids just trying to live. And there's something really great about it. I think that's especially really prevalent in today, where we see how kids are kind of standing up for what they feel about the world and what they want the world to be. And they're literally trying to save the planet. And I think that the Runaways embody that spirit in a lot of ways, if you want to pet it. So Kate Bishop is a really interesting character. She was introduced, and her story is essentially that she was a young woman who was raised incredibly rich, incredibly privileged in a Manhattan skyrise sort of situation, and she got attacked when she was walking through Central Park. And obviously that was a really horrifying and scary thing that happened to her, and so she went into therapy, and then she started taking self-defense classes to deal with what she had been through. And from that, when she finally meets up with the Young Avengers, she encounters this team of young heroes that are kind of just getting together for the first time, and they're trying to solve a crime that happened at her sister's wedding. And she's literally in a bridesmaid's dress like, hey, but real talk, can I like hang out with you guys or be a part of this or what? So she essentially ends up teaming up with the Young Avengers. They go back to Avengers Mansion. At this time, the Avengers are disassembled, and she finds Hawkeye's bow at the mansion, and she's like, cool. I can totally just be an archer like Hawkeye. She also finds Mockingbird's original pointy little mask, and she's like, listen, Clint Barton's busy being Ronin. I'm just gonna be Hawkeye for the time being. Later, Hawkeye comes back, tries to get his bow back, and they eventually become a sort of mentor situation, which is hilarious to me, though, because Hawkeye, Clint Barton, is so bad at life that it's really like Kate Bishop is teaching him a lot more. He's like, this is how you shoot, and she's like, this is how you become a person. So they're a good match for each other. I give them a lot of crap, especially Hawkeye a lot of crap, that is Clint Barton, for being the lesser Hawkeye, because Kate Bishop is just a straight-up badass. She later goes on to join up with a new team of Young Avengers, including her BFF, America Chavez. I'm obsessed with their friendship. They are best friends, and they are the greatest. They go on road trips and hang out with Kate's dog, Lucky the pizza dog. It's the best. But what I really love about Kate Bishop is she has this really great mix of dealing with deep trauma and having a great sense of humor. And she really deals with her problems. She has therapy. She talks about how she feels. She leans on the people in her life. And I think that is a beautiful thing to get to see in fiction. It's so easy to see a superhero and just be like, yeah, I crash everybody up and I never feel bad about it and everything's great. And it's kind of nice to see somebody who says, hey, I have a feeling about what I'm going through. And then also sometimes just kicks everybody's butts and is like, I feel really great about it. Oh, and not unlike that other Hawkeye, Clint Barton, she's also heading up the West Coast Avengers herself in the new run by Kelly Thompson. I highly recommend it. It's a great little team-up book with Kate at the helm. And they even run into Jimmy Kimmel. What more could you want? Now, taking a step back from all three of these stories, it's very interesting that all of them speak deeply to me, but they're all about essentially really privileged children having to deal with growing up and the reality of adulthood. And so there was something, I think, going through time where we were coming out of the 90s, which were a more frivolous time towards the end of the 90s. We were coming out of the Clinton era, which was a very prosperous time for America. And I think we were facing some of the real stuff. So,
All right. So now that we've gotten through that, did you see the progressive ideology just splattered all over everything that she talks about? And this is what is going on. You have these people, they're talking about the history of Marvel, and this history to them all leads up to this progressive ideology, and it leads up to these characters being constructed in this quote-unquote progressive way. Because of course, how does she see these heroes becoming heroes to begin with? Well, she quite clearly states that they become heroes once they recognize their privilege. And what do they do when they become heroes? Well, once they become heroes, they help the people around them. And how do they help the people around them? Well, of course, they help the people around them by helping them recognize their privilege as well. So again, you see that this whole idea of hero that they have is not based upon making good choices. It's not based upon them being paragons of virtue. It is based upon these characters being educated to a point where they recognize their privilege. And once they get to that point, then they can go out and be quote-unquote heroes by teaching other people and being examples for other people and teaching them to recognize their privilege as well. But the thing is that it's twofold in their teaching. They're not just teaching the people around them in the story to recognize their privilege, to be educated and then recognize their privilege, but they are teaching you, the reader, to recognize your privilege. What they are there for is to educate you so that you can recognize your privilege. And this is why, number one, they're going to continue to push these characters that failed in the comics over and over again. And number two, why they are not going to handle these characters well either within the movies or within their new television shows. Because I had a number of people in the comments of my last two videos saying that, hey, Kate Bishop's Hawkeye was good to begin with. They might make the new television series according to that original Hawkeye, and it could be good. And I had a bunch of other people saying, well, listen, Sam Wilson, Captain America, well, that seems like a natural progression. As long as they handle it well, it's actually going to be good within the movies. But again, the whole point is if they handle it well. And I will assert, they are not going to handle it well. And why are they not going to handle it well? Because, of course, the summit of what they are doing is to sell their progressive ideology. Again, as we see here, when they're talking about history, the summit of the history for them is when these heroes, these quote-unquote progressive heroes, became heroes by recognizing their privilege and then could teach it to others. And this is exactly what I've been talking about over and over again in some of my videos, about the fact that the way that these people present an argument isn't the way that traditional arguments are presented. They don't take their point and put it right at the first so that you know what they're talking about and then give you evidence for that point and you get to decide, again, you get to choose at the end whether or not you accept it. No, the actual playbook for these progressive people and how they convert people to believing what they believe is to present them an argument in a way that is emotional. And they don't put their point until the very end. And they quite specifically don't put it until the very end because the entire movement of their argument is to provoke you emotionally. They provoke you emotionally so it will disable your reason and it will hype you up emotionally. It will make you emotionally upset. And then once you get to the end, then you can be sold the point because your reason has been disabled and you're in such an emotional frenzy that they can now give you their point. Because if they gave you their point at the beginning, well, anybody with a little bit of reason would say, no, I don't think that's the case. And then they would have that in their mind for the entire argument and be able to make the case for themselves and choose for themselves whether or not these points make any sense. But they don't do that with an argument. No, they leave their point to the end. And that is exactly the way that they're going to present these characters now within the new movies and the new shows. They're going to take all of this history that you are emotionally invested towards, and the end point is always going to be directed towards the progressive ideology of teaching you about your privilege so that you can recognize that you have to be educated in their progressive ideology. And the other point is the fact that they are going to continue to take these characters and push them out there again and again and again. Because to them, all of this pushback that they're getting, all of these people saying that we don't want these heroes, we don't want to see this, we don't want to see Jane Foster's Thor, we don't want to see Kate Bishop's Hawkeye. Every time a person who has been indoctrinated into their progressive ideology hears that, what they actually hear is the fact that, hey, you're ignorant. You're not educated. And since you're not educated, and these characters are there to educate you, every time you say you don't want Kate Bishop or Jane Foster, every time you say that, that is another reason why we have to put these characters out there. Because the point of these characters is to educate you, is to make you recognize your privilege, is to make you recognize how ignorant you are, so that you have to accept our ideology. And since you are ignorant, and every time you say you don't want these things, you show your ignorance, that is just another reason for us to put these characters out again and again. And, as I said, the way that they're going to put these characters out there is the same way they put an argument out there. They're going to do it emotionally. They're going to use the emotional ties to disarm your reason, and then at the end, put their progressive ideology in so that you can be hyped up emotionally and disarmed rationally so that you accept it. And once again, as I have said in other videos, if you take all of that, if you take the idea of disarming a person's reason so that you can teach them an idea, what is that? What is that a definition for? Well, that's propaganda. That is exactly the definition of propaganda. Teaching someone an idea by getting around their rational mind. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.